Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Nino de Cosmo.
Girl, you and I would die, unbelievers bound to the tracks of the train.
Wow. A lot of energy. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Niagara Summit. So much great stuff happening at the conference. The expo was packed yesterday. A lot of networking, sharing of best practices, and of course, as John Sublette would say, Niagara 4. Watching the collaboration within the community is exciting. Niagara After Hours was absolutely spectacular. Please don't forget to vote for Innovator of the Year and Best New Products of the Year. There's 2 ways to vote. If you have a US phone, you can text your vote. If you don't have a US phone, please vote via the website. All instructions are in the exhibit hall and at registration. We want your participation. You know, in the last 24 hours, I was struck by a number of signs, I guess. I walked the exhibit floor yesterday and was amazed by all the technology innovators. This morning, I was also watching a little CNBC. They're doing a special this year, 25 years of rebels, icons, and leaders. They interviewed the chief executive officer of Buffalo Wild Wings. Some of you may be familiar with that franchise. Big business in chicken. And she talked about the use of tablets to drive productivity and customer engagement. It's going to be a big deployment for them. Does that sound familiar? The use of technology, tablets, to drive productivity and customer engagement. Sounds familiar to me. But those disparate data points, all of a sudden it struck me. I'm a lucky man. I get to be part of the rebels, icons, and leaders of the Niagara community, and I think that's pretty cool. Thank you again. On to our event. So as John mentioned yesterday, we can't provide end-to-end solutions without providing end-to-end security. So we're pleased to bring you some of the leading thinkers in cybersecurity. This panel will be moderated by Jeffrey Brown, senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, public television's prestigious nightly news program. In more than 20 years at NewsHour, Brown has interviewed numerous leading American national and international newsmakers. He's moderated studio discussions and reported from across the US and around the world. His work as a correspondent and producer has garnered an Emmy, 6 Cine Golden Eagle Awards, and many other honors. Brown regularly speaks at conferences and forums, including the US Islamic World Forum in Doha, Qatar, and the Aspen Ideas Festival. On to the panel. We have a diverse set of individuals that represents every aspect of our business. Marty Edwards, Director, ICS CERT. Fred Gordy, Technology Evangelist, Acting Enterprise Intelligence Group Program Manager at McKinney's, Inc. Shane Riggio, Vice President, IT, Massrich. Kevin Staggs, CISSP, Senior Engineering Fellow, Honeywell, ACS Advanced Technology Lab. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome them to the stage.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Good of you to come out so early. I'm Jeffrey Brown, and I'm calling this the Band of Paranoid Security Guys. That's what we all decided we should be called, and I thought we're in a big theater here. You want to hear a band, this is what you got, the Paranoid Security Guys. The bad guys are winning. Now, that's the conclusion from the latest Verizon data breach report that came out earlier this month. If you sit where I do in a newsroom, it is stunning to just think about the last couple of years and how much issues of cybersecurity have bubbled up to the very forefront, to front page news. Cyber espionage, the recent Heartbleed bug, Target, on and on and on. Even to my own dinner table the other night where we had a friend over for dinner and she was telling us about identity theft. It affects us all, and it has happened very quickly. In a newsroom, I say this sort of ironically, that's good news. Good news in the sense that it means it gives us a major story to be covering all the time and to report on for our viewers. But of course, it is really bad news for those millions of viewers. And it's bad news for our government. It is bad news for companies around the world, including, I'm sure, the ones that you work for. We're going to explore a lot of these issues over the next hour. We want to define the problem. We want to see where breakdowns occur. We want to talk about the barriers within corporate structures and security systems that allow these kind of breakdowns, and also talk about some of the possible solutions that everybody on the panel has found and that maybe will help you as well. We've all had a chance to talk on the phone and then a little today. It's a great group. I've encouraged them, and I think you'll see I didn't take much encouragement. This is a conversation. No speeches, no one-on-one interviews. We're just going to talk to ourselves and for you over the next hour or so. And I hope that it will be a conversation that is informing and even, dare I say, a little entertaining for you. So I just want to get everybody involved right away, and then we'll be off. And the first question, and Shane, I will start with you, is what's the problem? Let's define the problem from where each one of you sits. Shane, you start.
Good morning, guys. From our perspective, representing IT, a lot of the IT guys are saying, quote unquote, I'm putting a lot of locks on the front of the door, deadbolting, I've got the sensors, everything is fortified on the front side, but the back door or the back window is wide open. So how do I ensure that I'm mitigating some exposure on the back side when traditionally everything's been the front door?
Fred?
As an industry, we kind of developed this sense of convenience, and our customers came to us and wanted us to be able to give them control of their buildings in an easy way. Well, with being that we made it easy not only for them, but we made it also easy for the bad guys. So I like to use the analogy of tying the goat up in Jurassic Park. That's what we did. So we've kind of taken a step back. Instead of saying to the vendors and all that, what is it we need to do? So we've looked introspectively.
Kevin?
I think it's time to have a conversation, and you already mentioned this, but the conversation has to occur at all levels in the supply chain. Vendors have a responsibility to talk about what their product does, what kind of risks come with their products. We can never make a product that is 100% risk-free. Talk about those risks with our integrators and our end users and what those risks might mean in their environment. Have that conversation. And when you have that conversation, if a risk is not acceptable, have the conversation of how to mitigate that risk in the operational environment that you're in, and then monitor for that risk to ever occur. The vendors know that best, and communicating that information through that entire supply chain is very, very important.
And Marty?
Hey, the last word, right? So I think you've got the breadth of the panel with you've got the vendor represented, you have the integrators represented, and you've got the asset owner represented. The important thing to understand is that they all are going to be involved in that risk conversation.
Yep.
Because if, Shane talked about the open window, the back door. If you don't know where that back door is, you can't mitigate it or close it or put locks on it. So going through that assessment process, understanding where your risks are, so that you can choose how much to buy down that risk, because you can't get rid of all risk. Some risk is going to have to be accepted.
All right, so why don't we know where that back door is? I mean, why don't we know that?
I think it's because everybody puts it in a different place. So you've got a vendor, for example, that may or may not have a default hard-coded password that's inside their product. But then you've got an integrator that says, well, IT won't let me connect to this device through the IT network, so I'm going to go down to Best Buy and buy a DSL modem, and I'm going to stick it on the back door of the network. And until you make a very systematic approach to finding those, it's very difficult.
You're nodding in agreement. This sounds right.
Yeah, I believe you're spot on, Marty. This is more of a process thing than a technological issue. If the process needs to be a little bit greater, we need to show our cards a little bit more. And to Marty's point, we're all in it together. As an owner, integrator, vendor, manufacturer, everyone's got the same concerns. So from a process standpoint, if you would put maybe a little bit more time to open up about some of the things that you'd like maybe IT to help mitigate, IT would like to see the integrator help mitigate, I think that solves a lot, or at least opens the conversation.
Can you just to make it more concrete, can you give us an example of where in the process you see it breaking down?
Scopes of work. So as a client, well, I believe everyone in the audience is familiar with the statement of scope of work. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road. What exactly will you perform? What's the deliverable? What's the output? So I believe that is a great example of maybe adding a little bit more language, creating a little bit of a tighter scope to make sure that we're at least having that conversation before we engage the work to start.
Mm-hmm. And even during that definition of scope of work, there's that conversation you have to have up front about cybersecurity. And cybersecurity, there's really three big elements to cyber, to managing cyber: people, process, and technology.
Mm-hmm. And you notice that you put technology last. You know,
I did put technology
Social
last,
aspect.
and I did that on purpose.
Is that a lesson that you all learned the hard way?
Sure.
Yes.
Because technology originally was first.
There's a false sense that technology can handle everything, that we can monitor or we can defer any kind of attack with technology, and we can't. And I fly in and out of the Minneapolis airport quite a bit. And in the Minneapolis airport, on the way into the airport, there's a great sign there. The sign says, "If you see something, say something." I love that sign, and it's something about these kind of products. If the products see something going on, say something. But there's another piece to that that's really, really important. If you're going to say something, make sure someone's listening,
yeah.
and they're going to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you have monitoring devices and all the technology in the world is really no good unless you've got the human element there to actually do something about it. You know, we see installations all the time where the snake oil salesman has come around over the years and sold these black boxes and gizmos to stick on their network. But if you don't invest in the people to manage that, to actually implement those changes, it's really a waste of money.
Not just
To both of your points, I mean, you know, you use the example of going to Best Buy and getting the router. Well, that's inherent to what an integrator has been doing, is because instead of engaging IT at the beginning, the customer is coming to us, it's typically a building engineer or whoever it happens to be, and they just want their system online. They just want to be able to get to it.
Yes.
So what you're having to do is re-engineer the social aspect of it in the fact that now you have to engage IT first. You can't just say, you know, you can't yield to the building owner. You can't yield and say, you know, unless they just totally drive over you. But I mean, at the bottom line is they're coming to you as an expert. So if you need to engage the IT at the beginning.
Well, and that's where it comes back to the statement of work conversation.
Yes.
Is up front in the design document, make sure that you understand that this type of connectivity is a business requirement, but that it's also a business requirement to do it in a whatever the acceptable manner for that company is. And some companies' risk appetite is far different than other companies based on either what product they manufacture or what service they deliver.
Fred, what kind of breach worries you the most today?
The one, I mean, we've had to sit and look at our customer base, and the type of breach. I'm not as much worried about them cutting lights off. I'm not worried about them doing any of that. What I'm worried about them doing is hopping over, going into the point of sale network, going into that side, because that's where the bigger vulnerability to us as a company is, and at the customer as well. So that's the thing that keeps me up at night.
And that's because those processes have not been built in.
Right, because what's happened is, going back to the let's make everything easy, the system has been hung out on the web, has a public IP in it, or it's been port forwarded, or it's been set up using a commercial or a residential grade router, and then that network has been bridged over to the corporate network. And that's, you know, citing the Target breach. It wasn't the control system, but it was still a breach into the point of sale network, or in some cases the HIPAA network. Those are the kind of things that keep me up. It's not the control system going down. It's the control system being used as a gateway.
Kevin?
Something that keeps me up at night, not just that, but not being notified.
It's funny to
that
be in
might
Las
have-
Vegas and talk about what keeps you up at night, right?
Yeah, it is.
There's so many things to keep you up at night here. But on your mind,
On my mind is something that might have been in our product that allowed that breach to occur, and we didn't get notified of it. Because the only way that we can address that as a supplier is know that it was there. We can't always find those on our own. So if we're notified that it's there, then we'll take the action to correct it, notify our users that we've got a patch, or if it's really, really serious, get our users notified that there's something they need to do until we can get that patch out.
you know, that was I cited that Verizon study, but this just jumped out at me. It said 69% of breaches were discovered by an external party, indicating that most organizations don't even know when they've been breached until notified by someone outside the company. Now, why don't companies know?
Sometimes because the conversation hasn't occurred. I said people first, and I said people first on purpose. As an integrator, your people need to know how to have that conversation with the end users about what kind of systems they're putting in, what kind of exposure that they may be bringing to that user. The user has to have the conversation with their people of what kind of systems they're in there, how they're to behave. One of the number one ways of getting into systems today is social engineering, phishing attacks. And most people don't know what a phishing attack looks like and how not to respond to those because they're really good.
They are really good. I don't think people understand how good these attacks look. I mean, I think everybody is familiar with the term phishing. You know, that's the Nigerian bank scam where the guy sends the email to 10 million people. And if he gets 10 people to click, he's happy. The real sophisticated spear phishing is they get a list of all of these people in the audience because you're all registered, right? It's in a computer somewhere. They got your email address. They exfiltrate that from the network. They write a very specific email, attach the PDF of your comments, and say, "Hey, this is Jeff Brown. Would you like to look at my speech that I made yesterday?"
Yeah.
And you click on it.
Excuse me, I gotta go now.
Okay. No, you click
the
on
audience
it.
is going to run away too. You're scaring the hell out of everybody.
But they need to know, right? So you click on it. It actually opens up the document. It might have taken 50 milliseconds longer, and they've just installed a remote access Trojan and have complete ownership of your computer. So it's funny because, you know, I'm one of those old school cyber hacker guys, right? So you talk about the movie War Games or hackers, and they're hacking the Gibson. Nobody does that anymore. They're hacking people. They're hacking what we call the wetware, layer 8.
And they're going after the weakest layer, the weakest device in the network. And the weakest device in the network is typically where the conversation hasn't occurred. Yeah.
Well, there's also an aspect to that. I mean, you know, it doesn't take a whole lot. I mean, let's just be honest. In control systems, not to pick on any one individual, but...
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. But, I mean, seriously, we all know it. Everybody that's sitting in here is there are default usernames and passwords that I can easily download any literature. I can go into PDUs. I can go into whatever I want to go into. Then companies themselves have default usernames and passwords that if an employee leaves, he's been gone for 10 years, he can still get in the system. So we were talking about earlier the physical layer of security. Well, if you don't let them into the system physically, they can't get in. But still, there's so much we've got to do. We've got to turn over the user management to the customer, not us. We need to turn that over to them. Dell does not, when we buy a Dell server, Dell doesn't come in and manage us. We have to manage ourselves.
I think the other thing is people don't really understand how easy it is to find these vulnerable systems on the internet. So, you know, we all, for whatever business reasons, have to hang these devices off of the internet. And say a vendor has a significant weakness or vulnerability in a product that they're addressing, it's pretty easy to go and type in a few search terms and gain a list of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. I mean, The government, we receive spreadsheets all the time of, hey, here's 100,000 industrial control system devices attached to the internet. So I think everybody understands that a search engine like Google, if you want to find a Starbucks around here, you type in Starbucks in Las Vegas, Cosmopolitan, it'll tell you where. It doesn't do that by going out and searching the whole internet every time you type that in. It's a database and it caches that. Well, there's databases now that cache the devices attached to the internet. So you can go to a tool like Shodan, for example, and you can say, show me all vendor X products that are attached to the internet that are of this firmware level, and it'll give you that list. And then you can use those vulnerabilities against them. And we see that happening over and over.
Well, so Shane, how does it play out for at the end user level or the vendor level? We're talking about where vulnerabilities occur.
Well,
Sounds like you're an obvious one.
Well, I think we all agree there's a cost of convergence. You know, what we talk about with common infrastructure, ensuring that automation and Internet of Things, IP-aware devices, all can attach to a common network, comes with a cost. You can't do that haphazardly. So the cost of that in our scenarios are usually firewalls, security measures that help with your authentication, your access, your authorization. So those are the things that kind of help us at least meet halfway to say we recognize that there's a cost of putting everything on a common infrastructure. Here's the compromise. Meet us halfway and understand how layer 4 ports, mapped IPs or virtual IPs can try and help.
And the right time to invest in that cost is before that incident happens, because it's going to cost you far more to mitigate and clean up and come back after the fact than if you had invested in upfront and got your incident response procedures in place and exercised and practiced.
Well,
What ab- Yeah, no, go ahead.
it's about life cycle.
Yeah.
And in the life cycle, from a product life cycle, the best place to put security into products is at the very front end, at requirements. A lot of times today, security is bolted on. And when we bolt security on, we make the human aspect of configuring security, integrating security, and managing security very difficult. We need to get to the point in our products where security is a DNA strand of that product. And when it becomes a DNA strand in the product, it's just natural. There's always a step in any kind of product of commissioning. And that should be the piece where there's a little bit more of a human user experience. But once you get beyond that and the usage of the device, depending on where you're at, that user experience should not get in the way at all.
Yeah.
Same thing with integrators. Designing that security during the requirements phase, so it goes back to that conversation.
Yeah. It's much, much, much harder to put it in after the fact than it is to have the conversation. And it's a tough conversation. You know,
Yes.
it's one of those conversations that nobody really wants to have.
Why is
because
that?
I think it's because people have this weird feeling that if they talk about it, they take on the responsibility or liability for the problem.
Yeah.
And cybersecurity is something, it's a due diligence conversation. We're all liable. It's like being I think I heard Nino say earlier, it's like being a good citizen. You know, making sure you do that base cybersecurity hygiene is something that the vendor needs to do, the end user needs to speculate or stipulate up front, the integrator needs to work on.
Yep.
The government has programs to help at all those stages, but if we don't all talk about it openly
Yeah,
and
but this-
honestly without ownership,
Yeah.
you know, we're not going to fix
I mean,
it.
this lack of openness, we were talking about this earlier, because it always strikes me in every news story about this, you inevitably get to the line where it said that, you know, an anonymous source who did not want to talk about his or her own company. For obvious reasons. I mean, it's perfectly understandable why you wouldn't want to have your company associated with a particular breach. But it always strikes me that if we don't know who that was or exactly what happened, then how does everyone else learn
You know how
from
hard
that?
it was?
You know, so you know, I think you're always fighting this in this world of security, and especially cybersecurity, of wanting to get information out but wanting to hold information, especially, no doubt, in the competitive atmosphere that you're all in.
You know how hard it was to get my press office to approve me sitting beside you?
How hard?
Because of that same reason. Because there's a I don't want to use the word sensationalism, but there's a cybersecurity is sexy, right now in the media and in the news and around the dinner table. So everybody's rooting around looking for those things. I think we're finally getting to the point where there's enough open examples that we can talk about, that people understand, that they've read in the paper or they've seen on the news. So there's the awareness levels coming up. But I think that fear of whether it's stock prices or whether it's some legal recourse, I mean, I think there's some real fear there.
Yeah, Fred?
Well, to take that a little bit further, is, I mean, we've got to stop worrying about if we say it, it might make it real. You know what I mean? Because it's real. So I don't know that I can say the other company's name, but this is an example. There's two types of preparedness. There's preparedness beforehand and there's preparedness afterwards. And this one particular customer, which we all have heard about, is, I mean, I could say, how many of you in here have heard of the Target breach? Everybody would raise their hand. Well, at this thing that I went to, he mentioned this second company, and nobody raised their hand. And he said the reason is because they were prepared. They were prepared what to say publicly. They were prepared what to say to their customers. They were prepared. I mean, they were prepared across. And, you know, I would challenge everybody that's here that's an integrator is how prepared are you if you get breached? How prepared are you if your customer gets breached? I mean, McKinney's, we had to turn around and say, we're not. We're not. So we're working on that.
What did it take you to force that?
Target?
Yeah.
I mean, let's be blunt. I mean, when it came down, when I saw the name of the company, I did just like apparently another billion people did, was type the name, and when their website came up, it had bandwidth exceeding. Well, what does that mean? That means everybody's looking at this bad integrator. Yeah. Well, that could be us.
So tell us the conversation that happened, and at what level did the conversation happen to realize that includes us?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean the conversation that took place at your
internally.
Yeah, internally.
It was basically this. Is I said, okay, this is Fazio Mechanical. I mean, we can say the name; it's out there. It could be McKinney's Mechanical. Mm-hmm. People could not get to our website, and effectively, before the lawsuits start, who's going to want to do business with us? Because some of our customers are pretty high-profile customers. So all our credibility, day one, you lose it. You lose money day one when this happens. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just got to be real about that fact. Don't worry about the lawsuits because you're going to lose money quick.
Marty and I come out of the industrial control system space, and industrial control systems, the conversation has been going on now. Personally, for myself, I met with our Honeywell's first customer in December of 1995, and then with a very major company in May of 1996. So the conversation has been going on for a while. Mm-hmm. In the industrial space as well, disclosures happen quite regularly. And ICS CERT, which is Marty's organization, publishes those fairly regularly. We've had a couple from Honeywell that have gone through there. There's usually an article that goes out when that happens. Usually we coordinate the timing of that. So ICS CERT gives Honeywell the opportunity to notify our customers first, get the patches installed on our customers' systems, and then we do a coordinated release through ICS CERT to get the rest of the world notified. And then usually some of the media picks that up. It's usually specific to the industrial control space, but it's over. Because what happens is the industry sees, in fact, the attitude in the industrial control space is, oh, okay, Honeywell had one. We know they've taken care of it. They've informed their customers. It's getting patched. Life's good.
It's interesting. We used to kind of joke that the industrial control system space lagged the IT space by a period of about 10 years. So it's interesting because now we see the the rest of the Internet of Things, whether it's building automation systems, residential, we're even handling vulnerabilities in medical devices now.
Really?
Insulin pumps and pacemakers and, what was that show, Homeland? You remember that?
Yeah.
So that stuff's real, right? I mean, there are actual medical devices that you can connect to through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and there was a hacker a couple years ago showed that he could hack his insulin pump remotely. So, I mean, you think of a group like this.
Paranoid security group here.
You push a button and I can change your insulin dosage.
Yep.
Where's my iPhone?
Yep. I had a friend that happened to work for that company that was, he was involved in the artificial pancreas research for that company. And the day that happened, I got a phone call and said, "Where are you?"
Yeah.
Because we need to have the conversation. What do we need to do? How do we respond? What happened? What do we do now? How do we fix this? What do we need to put in our environment? To
Well,
deal
so
with
how
this?
do you build in security, even short of that level? I mean, even smart buildings, the Internet of Things, they're all attached, and there's fewer people. I mean, we started talking about, right, it starts with people. But in this growing technological world, there's fewer people involved because the machines are talking to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you build in the security in that world?
I think there's a concept that we use quite a bit that's called defense in depth, and you have to apply security at every step. So it's not just in the network layer or in the device layer, in this vendor's equipment or in how this integrator implemented it. It's how you specify your statement of work and your procurement language. How do you pass some of those security requirements on to your suppliers? It's training. We were having an off-stage conversation about things like awareness training. Your screensaver on your computer can be giving you little tidbits of how not to click on this email.
Right.
So I think it has to be done in a pervasive way throughout your entire organization.
Yeah.
And for machine to machine, I made a statement earlier about commissioning.
Yeah.
And commissioning is about creating that trusted connection. And if it's a machine-to-machine environment and that trusted connection is not created, be scared. But if it's a created, trusted connection, in other words, when you have that device join in machine-to-machine communications, that is defined how that device is proving that it's who it says it is
Right.
to communicate with those other devices in the network. That's a really important step that has to occur.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be I don't want to ever sound like a doom and gloom guy, right? There are solutions for every single
You're
step
failing.
along here. So, I mean, the integrators have a whole suite of, whether it's technology tools or procedural tools to better that security as they go along. And they just have to borrow from other sectors, whether that's the IT sector or some of the telecommunications sector work. I mean, there are fantastically secure systems that exist, and I think rather than reinvent the wheel, which engineers, we all want to reinvent the wheel, I think that's important.
Well, the thing is, though, there's also, using that analogy, is I don't want people to think the set it, forget it mentality is okay. Because even though you may set up something that is today secure, tomorrow it probably isn't. I mean, and we're so used to that life cycle of, in the IT realm, 3 years, ours is whatever. I mean, 10, 20 years of control systems out there just running away. We have to change that mindset.
But why is that mindset there?
That's just, I mean, it's for years, building owners, what they want to do is they want to get their system up and online, and they don't want to do anything else to it. They just want it to run, with as little or no interaction as possible. So they expect that if they buy a piece of equipment, it's a 10 or 20-year life cycle, 30-year life cycle, and we were 40-year life cycle. But in the IT world, where they're used to being hit with these, just technology changing, but not only the cybersecurity side of it, is they know they have to change equipment every 3 to 4 years.
Right.
Some of it,
And-
Yeah, I was just going to back up for a second to state the machine-to-machine is real, and it needs time. So back to your project plans. If you're implementing something, and let's say you say, hey, I can do this in 2 weeks, give it 4, so you can properly baseline, so you can ensure that the machine is who he or she says they are. So the cost of that would probably be, I can't hit your original scheduled go-live date. But the cost of not doing that, to Marty's point, can be...
I'll give you 2 examples right now that we're dealing with. We got one customer that we engaged IT like we're supposed to. I mean, this is just being transparent. We got the other customer who should have been done in February. And now we're having to go through, because there's HIPAA laws involved, and we're having to go back through all the processes. So which one cost us more money?
Right.
And I think you made another key statement: don't set it and forget it. There's a statement that a lot of security people like to say: security is a journey, not a destination. And the reason that we say that is because what's secure today may not be secure tomorrow. The bad guys are getting better. More and more stuff is getting interconnected. And as that's occurring, the rules change.
You know,
and we don't get to set them. The bad guys set them.
Right.
Well, I'm curious, and Shane, I'll start with you on this. Something that we've hearing, at least I'm hearing more about, is the breaches through third-party operators. The vendors, the air conditioning company, the vending machine. Now, those are all over your malls and your
That's
retail
correct.
space.
I feel
right?
like the seat's getting warm now.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the kind of thing that, at least I would never have even imagined that that's a way in to the databases.
Right.
But there's this sense now that once you're into even the vending machine, you're into everything. I don't know how true that is. Tell us how, is that true, and what do you, and is there awareness of that?
Yeah. Yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
It's absolutely true, but there is awareness. Hopefully this panel is a good example of how people are wanting to discuss more. Depending on how your network is laid out, depending on how your IT department is either engaged or on the fence or completely disengaged, that'll really give you a better picture of the overall topology or architect. Once you have that in place, what we would recommend from our stance is a multi-vendor, multi-layered approach. And it's the same thing as defense in depth. You want to ensure that all your eggs aren't in one basket. So depending on your threat assessment, a vending machine may not have the compromise backlash that, let's say, a central plant may. You may apply a different set of parameters or controls.
But I think that threat assessment has changed. The threat assessment for a vending machine in a building in the past was,
Will I get my dimes out, my quarters out, right?
Is somebody going to come after me because the machine didn't work?
Right, right.
Now the threat
that
assessment...
candy bar that's constantly stuck, right?
Yeah.
And you're shaking it.
Yeah, now it's different. The vending machine's on the network. And depending where I put it on that network depends on what kind of threat I'm adding to the environment.
Right.
Yeah, that's the key part, and I think that we go out and do assessments of different infrastructures, different sectors, certainly not limited just to building automation. And we find some groups that have very specific network segmentation rules. They have different security zones set up, so they know where sort of the crown jewels of the company are, and they build these rings around them. But we go into other places where all of the devices are on one big, huge, collapsed network. And when you're in that situation, if you have your engineering drawings for your proprietary, whatever the crown jewels of your company are, sitting on a server, and the vending machine over there is on the same network, then anybody that has access to that vending machine has access to that.
Yep.
And is that the conversation you have?
It is part of the conversation we have.
What's the rest of the conversation you have?
So you have the conversation about the network segmentation, and I think the majority of it is just understanding where the value is for the adversary in your network, and then building in the appropriate security controls at all levels. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the people to maintain that life cycle of that equipment and that technology and those processes, and you don't have that, you have to have that capability to react. So when something happens, if you don't already have the press releases done, if you don't already have your phone list of who we're going to call and why we're going to call them, and get that done, you're going to be scrambling.
But it's more than just the value of the data you already know about, especially in the discussions today and in the world of the Internet of Things. the data that comes from the Internet of Things may have different values to different people, depending where that data resides. And even thinking and having those discussions today about what kind of data that is, and having the discussion with people that, in the security world, we call it the evil bit. But people that have that evil bit, how am I going to use this data to my advantage as a person with malfeasance?
Yeah.
Versus how is this going to be data that's used to the advantage of
And
using the
that's
Internet
a
of
hard
Things?
thing. I mean, we don't, I try to hire as many people with that evil bit as possible, right? And it's not for doing evil things, right? That's, I think, you have to get past that.
How do you judge where the line is?
Well, part of it's
The
because
white hat and the black hat, right?
part of it's because we do a thorough background check and
Oh,
security investigation.
I forgot you can get into all of our information. And,
No, the important thing I think to realize though is that you have to have people that rotate your system around and look at it and go, what could I do that's bad with this
Yes.
system? Not necessarily because they want to do something bad to it,
Yeah.
but because they want to expose the weaknesses so they can fix it.
What the
And
research,
that's hard.
the researchers that found out the vulnerability about the insulin pump, they weren't the bad guys.
yeah.
No, he was a diabetic that
Yeah.
needed his insulin, right?
Right. So, you have to have somebody in your company that thinks like a bad guy.
Yeah, you do. And
You really do.
And you have to. My wife hates traveling with me now because I look at power grids and elevators and lights, and I look at things very different since I got into this space. But it's not easily trained. So I think part of the problem in cybersecurity is we have a supply chain of people problem.
Yeah.
There's very, very few people that have both the IT background and the industrial controls or the automation background, as well as that evil bit, right?
Well, we should spend, I want to go to that because just to think forward a little bit. We've been flicking at it, but to help people think about what they can do, because one of the recurring themes here constantly is just the kind of silos that are in place. That there are these systems, and there's a starting company, and then that goes to another company, and again, and it ends up at an end user, and then there's the IT people, etc. It sounds as though one of the simple problems, although it becomes quite complicated, people aren't talking to each other.
Yeah.
There's a term, and I'm probably using it wrong, but there's a term called operational technology.
Yeah.
But in my mind, what that means is, and this is kind of my background, is I came from IT, but I'm in the control industry. I understand both sides. It's almost a new vertical of an employee that you need to hire, is one that has a really good IT background and who knows how to engineer a control system. You can't have that silo of two because they don't know how to talk.
It's interesting. When we go out and do these risk assessments for companies, quite often that's the first time that the security guy and the control systems guy have ever met in the company.
Really?
And so you bring them together at
tells
the
you a
table.
lot, doesn't it?
It
Yeah.
certainly does.
Yeah.
You bring them together at the table and they go, "Oh, hi, we've never met." It's like, really? You're kidding me. That's the guy that does the security for your networks, and that's where you make, the top secret recipe for Coke or something.
And those
Never met each
discussions are fun to watch sometimes. I've been involved in quite a few of them where on the control side, I helped bring those environments together. And watching the difference in language, because an IT guy talks about the risk to the intellectual assets of the organization or the company. The building control guy talks about the risk to his equipment, the risk to the safety of people that might be in the environment, and depending on the system, the risk to the environment. And it's a very, very different language to watch. And sometimes pulling those two languages together, it's a lot of fun to do it.
It is. It's homework assignment for these guys, right?
I guess so.
If you're the IT guy, you need to go find your network guy and vice versa.
Do you know that guy?
Absolutely. He's on staff, maybe in the audience.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to the insulin pump example as well, because the insulin pump ended up being a very, very public disclosure. And the reason that it became a public disclosure, because the guy that found it didn't know who to contact when something went wrong. And it's really important that everyone in the chain have that well-known place of how to contact the organization that you work closest with, that there's been a breach, maybe not even a breach, but a potential vulnerability in the product or the deployment of the product. Because vulnerabilities occur at both levels. They occur because there's a flaw in the product, or they occur because there's a flaw in the deployment, or they occur because nobody was listening.
Right. The conversation hasn't started.
Yeah.
You know, another way of asking this question about the silos is just to say simply, who's responsible for security
We
at
all
a
are.
company?
All of us.
Everyone.
Oh, you're pointing at him.
Oh,
Oh, you're
correct.
agreeing.
No,
with
no.
him.
Yes, the government.
I'm
But I
from
mean,
the government.
too often it's like the answer is this,
Yeah,
right?
you're right.
The old
It's what I call
Wile
the
E. Coyote or
recycle
something.
sign. Everyone's pointing to someone else.
Yeah.
But you're right, all of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And until we get that realization that it is me, it's all of us, it's not the guy next to you.
Yeah.
We're not going to move forward.
You know, another interesting aspect to this to me, and one of you brought it up right at the beginning, was determining the level of risk that you're comfortable with, or that your company is comfortable with. I'm assuming that 100% safety is that even something anybody consider? I mean, how do you decide? How do you determine risk, the level of risk and who makes that determination?
It's part of the conversation about bringing the two groups together. There's far more than two
Yeah.
that have to sit at that table. You need to have the C-suite of your company that can make those risk-informed decisions. You need to have it's kind of like the auditors or the risk assessment people that understand where the different risks are within your company. The financial people, the lawyers, everybody has to be in the same room. All companies have a different risk appetite, and I think all systems inherently have to have a different, the ability to tune where that risk is comfortable for your company. So if you're protecting, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets, vis-a-vis, you're keeping the lights on in some rural place that doesn't have a significant asset. I mean, there's a difference in the protection that you would apply to those.
So how does that, I mean, Fred, how does that play out when you're working with clients? You have to determine what level of risk they're willing to accept.
Yeah, yes, we do. But also, too, while you were talking, Marty, I'm sitting here thinking there's also a reality here that I don't know how many system integrators are represented here. I don't know how many there are in the world. But, there are some of them that do not have, like we have a risk manager. We have legal teams. We have that kind of thing. But there's some companies that don't. So where do they go? That's the concern I have is, they may get that opportunity to do work with the banking institute, and they're just not prepared for it. Do we say you can't participate in this work, or is there a way that we can say, here's a resource for you?
Yeah, and I think there's a number of resources available. The private sector certainly has a lot of companies that are specialized in the security risk analysis space. We certainly have programs within the government that can be utilized at no cost.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenge, I think, is in a lot of cases, people don't even understand how that vending machine or that remote node that's a modem connected in a substation somewhere poses a risk to
It's
them.
a great service opportunity if you're in the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
I think it's
Everyone,
needed.
Is that a conversation that you
Absolutely.
have? What level of risk are we willing to accept?
you have to have that conversation.
Yeah, and from an end user standpoint, I think if you're pushing our envelope and you're asking questions that we don't have the answers to, great opportunity to add that as a value service. If you can help us get to that point, I think we would welcome it.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen conversations happen, for example, where you have these systems that are interconnected, where the company has made the business decision that the value of that data coming across that wire is not worth the exposure to this process or to this facility, and so we'll disconnect it. And that's a corporate, high-level, executive-level decision that gets made. I think that ultimately the things that the C-level, the CEOs tell us is they don't get enough information coming up about that landscape so that they can even make that decision. They feel that they're in a vacuum, that they only get told what they think they want to hear, I guess, you know. And I think that's wrong. You have to have a very open dialogue about, well, sir, with all due respect, you know, we connected this because of this memo that you told us to do, but we need to explain to you what risk that poses to the organization.
There's another piece to that risk discussion. Okay, you want to disconnect it from the network. Disconnecting something that's got ones and zeros in it, which is what we're really talking about, from the network, has a risk itself. Because many times you need to be able to update that, or you're going to take on more cost now because it's disconnected, because if it's a vending machine, you're going to have to go from machine to machine to machine to physically look and see when it needs to be refilled, instead of having automatic notification of when it needs to be refilled and with what.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons we do this.
And the good part though, and I still try to convince you that I'm not the doom and gloom guy, right? Is that, you know, DHS, NIST, and others, there's a cybersecurity framework. There's a lot of models for how you should assess that risk. How do you go about measuring in the different areas? So it's an area of science or art that's improving. We're not starting from scratch. We've been here for 10, 15 years. Information assurance is a mature engineering discipline subject matter now. So I think there's resources to draw.
Well, so we're talking about building in security at the get-go and assessing risk and things like that. But you're also saying that too many companies are not good at responding once something happens. Do we see any better sense of that, of having the people in place, having the awareness in place for how does one respond?
They'll be far better after they've had to respond that first time.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
So it really, it's still that level. It's like
It's
like children after you get,
It depends.
something happens and you have to.
It
has to happen to you.
All I can say is based on the responses that I get back in personal experience. I just feel like that if we were looking in the stages of development, we're still in crawl to walk stage.
I think sometimes.
Really? Wait a minute.
Well,
Crawl to walk stage in terms of
how do we
knowing
respond?
the security systems and responding, or
Responding. And now, in terms of how we are looking at as integrators about, how to secure these systems, I would say that, we're better than 50%.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that was something that when I was hit with that between the eyes is, how are you going to respond to a breach?
Yeah.
I had not thought of it.
So what's the worst kind of response that you've seen?
No response.
No, really, yes.
No response?
No response.
Yeah.
It's the deer in the headlight look.
I think where it happens is not only no response, but not knowing who's responsible to respond.
Exactly.
So from an end user's perspective, it's, well, is this our fault? Is this something we pass to the integrator? Is
Absolutely.
the vendor responsible? And we've tossed the term breach around fairly loosely, I think, here. Incident response is a pretty wide swath. So, incident response to Kevin and I in the vulnerability disclosure area about what we're going to say about a product weakness is a lot different than how is a company going to respond to a data deletion type of attack where all of a sudden all of your servers are wiped clean. How are you going to go and where's your emergency restoration plan? Where do the hard drives come from? Where's the data come from?
Yeah.
What are the time frames? Which ones are more prioritized to get up and running first? Different conversations, right?
I think a lot of times the response, you gave a great example about Fazio. You understood the threat because you were in a parallel business. And a lot of the times the challenge is to make that translation. Mm-hmm. Oh, I saw it happen to Target, or I saw it happen to Fazio. Being able to translate that into, what does that mean to me? How can that happen to me? And if it's happened to you, you believe. If it's happened in a space or an industry or to someone that's directly parallel with what you do, you believe.
It brings it home.
It brings it home. But if you can't bring it home, then it's very hard to have that conversation, because the easiest answer is, we don't do that, we're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't apply.
And
Yeah.
how much does public pressure and public awareness play into this now? I'm again thinking of my own role reporting on this kind of thing and bringing it to a large general audience. I'm in Washington, so I think about policy issues. How much is the pressure being felt on companies? How much is there a sense of perhaps more regulation from the government or oversight of these systems to the extent that consumers are compromised and feeling the pain?
Well, not to take anything. And we talked earlier about, because I really want to engage with these guys a little more to help us to kind of spread the word. But I don't want it to be government first. There's a lot of good information that we can get, but we have to be proactive. We can't sit around and wait.
It goes back to that conversation of we're all responsible.
Right.
I think the government certainly has a coordination role and an education role, especially to protect the consumer at large. But ultimately, each company has to decide how and where they're going to do that. And some companies invest in their own personnel to do that. Other companies pass that responsibility on through a subcontract or services arrangement. So I think that we're all responsible.
You were telling us earlier a funny story about how when you show up at conferences like this, people would say, "What's
Yeah.
Homeland Security doing?"
We would have our little booth in the exhibit hall, and people would come up to us and go, "Why is Homeland Security here? Is this TSA? You here to inspect my luggage?" and now when we show up, people come up to the booth and they say, "Do you remember the procurement language document that helped us to specify how we pass security on to our integrator and vendor? We have a question about Rev 9 of that on this page." So they're asking very specific questions, not universally in all sectors. That's why I was really excited to come to this session, because building automation, and that is really the focus is shifting towards that. Whereas we've done this for years in the big refining and chemical and oil and gas and energy grid. When people think about cybersecurity, the first thing that usually comes to mind is the power grid, and that's in some cases because that's where the reporting has been.
Right.
But it manifests itself in all sectors.
I think the power grid's a great example, talking about regulations and NERC and FERC and what regulations are there, and regulations are good where they need to be in place. I think there's a danger with regulations in the cyber world, and the danger is that cyber is moving very quickly, and regulations create a culture of minimum compliance. And if we go down the minimum compliance path, we could be in real trouble.
Yeah, the slow-moving aspect of regulation
Yeah.
too is that from a government perspective, regulation takes years to develop and implement and codify, and by the time we've done that, we're protecting ourselves against threats that are 10 years old.
Yeah.
And we have to have the flexibility in these systems to be able to respond accordingly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shane?
I just wanted to go back to that pressure question, because sometimes the pressure can go twofold. As an end user, we get pressure to access everything from anywhere. Plain. I want access to anything from anywhere. Figure it out.
At any time.
Anytime.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can take
And that pressure comes from?
From your C-level suite, from your building operators. They want to be able to be untethered, walk around. It's really cool to take a tablet and start controlling some things on the fly. We get that. But you can take that conversation, and that can dovetail into a security conversation very easily.
Well, and that's where there's capabilities and technologies that can be leveraged.
Yeah.
So say, okay, do you really want to do that? Here's the briefcase and the handcuffs, and the
Well,
guy that's going to stand behind you.
Is that the conversation you're dovetailing into?
Yep. And
Let's look at this tablet and see what's actually on there.
Absolutely. And we use a teeter-totter or a seesaw. And we say you can have ease of administration with real light security, or you can have light security and a hard time going through some layers.
But it's a good it's a good opportunity for education, because then
Right.
it's like, okay, you want to take your tablet home and control the lighting to this big stadium, or what happens when your 4-year-old gets a hold of it and shuts the power off to a huge mall or something?
Well,
and things like that happen. People laugh, but
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. It was the Super Bowl a couple years ago, right, when the lights went out at halftime.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll tell you what. We all put our phones on the table and we took bets on whose was going to ring first. I won.
Nice.
Really?
Yeah, it was within 30 seconds. Is this a cyber event? Do we need to be tracking this? So the people I hang around with, whenever something like that happens, the thought process is could this have been cyber?
Yeah.
And if it was, what's the impact to our business? And how would we have protected against that? So I think that's a good kind of mindset to get.
And I think the other piece, especially the anytime, anywhere model, which is becoming more and more important, that raises the risk because now you're putting those devices out there at the edge, or you may be. And because you're doing that, you got to watch them closer.
Yep.
And if an update comes out, you got to apply it quicker. The more layers of defense you have protecting what you have, you're buying time if an update comes out, potentially. But if you're right there on the edge, you got to get that update out. First, you got to do the assessment. Have the discussion again. When an update comes out, there needs to be enough information in that disclosure. How can this be exploited? Not the details. It's irresponsible to disclose the full details, but give the people enough information to make that decision, because it has to be made by someone other than who's putting the patch out.
The nice thing when you get into this, your device anywhere conversation is, I think people are generally aware of the fact that wireless devices or that type of communication is insecure. So it's interesting that most projects that I've seen, there's more security implemented in them just because people have that awareness that you're walking around with a device. That they shouldn't forget about all the wired backdoors, open windows that they have on the network as well. But it gives you an opportunity to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, okay, so we just got 2 minutes left here, and we started by going around. Everybody sort of said, what is the problem from your perspective? So let me end doing a similar thing, but this time, what is the solution? Or what will companies that are most successful in this cybersecurity realm, what characteristics will they have? What should they do? Let's start with Kevin. We'll come this way.
Well, I still want to go back to conversations. I think the conversation we had up here, which was with all levels, we got to know each other over a couple weeks, and the conversation for us was easy. We had some great conversations this morning before we came up here. Those conversations need to continue, and they need to grow out from here. Everybody needs to have that conversation. So end users, talk to your integrators. Have that discussion with them. Integrators, talk with your end users and talk with your vendors. And vendors, talk with your integrators. Talk with the end users if you have access to them. You don't always have access to them. But have those conversations where they're appropriate.
Shane?
I would say the solution is don't be intimidated or upset with an IT department. IT departments are recognizing the opportunity. We presented yesterday and we said IT has a new value-added service. So embrace IT as a whole. If you get some good engaged IT departments that recognize they can't just reset passwords anymore, they're going to want to be engaged. They're going to want to help. So I'd like to think that the IT guys are equal partners that aren't running the other way.
Fred?
I would say be very, very, very honest with yourself as a company from the top down. Take a look at where you're at. Realize that what you're about to do is going to hurt and it's not going to be easy and it may cost some money at the beginning. And re-educate yourself and your people, and then you can start to work out. And to go to your point is engage IT day one.
I would say start somewhere. A lot of people, I think, are scared of the cybersecurity conversation. It's too overwhelming to them because everything is vulnerable and everything's connected. Pick one system. even if it's not your most critical system. Pick a system, send the people that manage and maintain that system on some free training around the country. Use the tools that are available to do that risk assessment and start that conversation. And then sit back as a company and look at how you did that on that one system and do a lessons learned. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How do we fix it? How do we get better? But start that journey. It's a journey, not a destination. Right. You have to start the journey.
Well, I don't know about loving the IT guy, but everything else sounds like Life 101 to me. Talk amongst yourselves, be honest, and start. And love IT.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Kevin Staggs, Marty Edwards, Fred Gordy, and Shane Riggio. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.